Thank you guys so much for being here and for showing your film. I want to congratulate you. I know that tomorrow is a big day. You had a premiere last month, a couple of weeks ago, I guess, in LA. Is that right?
In LA, yeah.
And tomorrow is the premiere here in New York. Congratulations for that, and thank you so much for coming here and showing it to us ahead of the game. We really
Thanks for
appreciate
having us. This is really cool.
I think that a film, every time you make a film, it kind of has life of its own. You never know kind of like when you're starting, where it's going to wind up and how it's going to get there. And when I was reading a little bit about this project, I thought it was really interesting. You guys seem to have created a real collaboration and a company together. But when you started making this film, Jennifer, you guys didn't know each other. So I was hoping that you guys, because I think it's so important for us as filmmakers who are learning, to hear the stories about how a film gets made, and it goes from inception, writing and directing it, and then finally screening it and premiering it in New York and Los Angeles, and then having a collaboration that is so important to actually getting that to happen, and yet not knowing it was going to happen. So maybe you could just give us the history and the story and how it all came about.
Okay, sure. Well, like you pointed out, it's a very collaborative process, making a film from conception to delivery. So there's, especially on independent film, there's a wide range of producers that can join a project at any point in time, depending on what's needed for that specific phase of the project. So Billy Bates went through many phases and many incarnations. I shot part of it in Austin and shot part of it here in New York. So I met Julie, probably 2/3 into actually filming the movie, at a time when I was wrapping up what was happening in Austin, and we actually met in Austin. She was going to school there, and it was a very coincidental scenario how we met. I was leaving Texas and getting back to New York, and we decided to do a short film together because we had hit it off creatively. I really liked Julie's writing a lot, and we decided that we just wanted to collaborate, and I had a break in filming Billy Bates, so we did a short together that I produced that Julie directed that made us realize we worked well together. At that point, I still needed to raise more financing for Billy Bates. I still needed to shoot an ending and a couple other scenes as well. And then obviously the whole post process and marketing and getting it into the world. So given our fruitful collaboration on the short film we did together and Julie's reaction to the footage that I had already shot, and the fact that my producers were in Texas and not physically present with me in New York, and I really needed help, she decided she wasn't gonna go back to school, that she wanted to learn producing by actually producing, and she was down to just get dirty and do whatever was needed of her, and we partnered from there. So she produced the ending and a couple other scenes, and then also post-production, which was a whole process in and of itself with the music and the color and the several editors we went through and getting it into festivals and that whole thing. So that was like the beginning of our partnership.
So Julie, you studied here at the Film Academy, in the filmmaking program, so interested in directing, and then you're out there starting to do some stuff, and then this project comes along, and now suddenly you're making the leap to producing.
Yeah, exactly. I had just actually finished, I met Jen before I came here. I came here in the summer of 2009, and Jen and I met in the winter of 2009. So I had just finished studying here in the intensive program when Jen and I shot our short film, Abracadabra, that I directed.
I was in one of your projects from New York Film Academy.
That's right. Jen was in we did a continuity exercise about a menage a trois, and she was in it. It was crazy. But yeah, so anyway, we met in the winter, and like she said, she was shooting it. And then after we wrapped on Abracadabra, our short film, in the summer, she was like, "Hey, do you want to check out some footage from this experimental project that I'm working on?" And I said, "Sure." And at that point in time, my intention was actually to go back to Texas and study film at the University of Texas. That was what I was going to do in the fall. And Jen showed me the footage, and I just thought it was super awesome, and I thought that it was, unlike anything I'd ever seen before, and it was inspiring to me. And like she said, she needed more help with the production side of things. And I had just studied here, and I had made a short film on a real set that Jen produced for me. That was that was like the real deal. So it kind of felt for me in that moment like going to film school in Texas was going to be more of a step back, as opposed to hopping on board Billy Bates and just finishing it, and learning it by doing it, which I really did. I mean, it was definitely a learning process for me. There were some learning curves, and there were moments where I kind of had to I didn't know what I was doing because I'd never produced before, so I kind of just had to act as if I knew what I was doing when I was talking to other people, and they bought it, so it worked. And
it's kind of part of the game even when you're directing too. Like for first-time directors, you have to pretend, you actually have to pretend that you are an expert, but you're not an expert. And you kind of fumble through it, and if you do it well, people kind of don't realize.
Yeah, exactly. And Jen, there's a 10-year age difference between Jen and I, and she came up through physical production, so she was my producing partner on the project as well as the director. And she kind of helped guide me when I didn't know what to do necessarily. But yeah, the post process was really full on as well with the color correct and the editing. The way that she shot the film was she captured a ton of different footage in all sorts of different ways, and then really the story came alive in the edit. So it was very similar to editing a documentary, where you sort of just kind of see everything that you've got and decide what you want your narrative to be, and anything that doesn't support that, whether you love it or not, just kind of gets trashed. And I think that was an exciting process for me to watch as the creative producer, to watch Jen go through that.
I'd love to talk a little bit about the distribution of the film and how it's come about. I mean, what's new about, to me, it's not really new, but from when I was starting to make films to now, with independent films like this, I'm noticing that people can go out and they can purchase copies of this film already. It's on iTunes, and you can purchase it digitally and in other formats. How did the process of figuring out how this particular film should be distributed today? How did you go about trying to find people who would buy it, and where the venues were for that distribution?
It's really... Man, it's really like any process I feel like you go through in life. It's like dating, or it's like finding a college, or it's just all about finding the fit, and I feel like you have to nurture that process, especially when you're dealing with what the market calls a specialty film, or it's not a genre film, or there's no movie stars to drive the marketing, it doesn't fit into a box per se. So it's especially important then to go on as many first dates as you can with various sales agents and distributors and festivals, and just really find out what people are looking for, find out who's hungry for this kind of content. So I feel like we spent, honestly, a couple of years doing that, because I'd come up through the industry. I had a lot of relationships to kind of go to and say, like, hey, will you watch this film? What do you think? Like, where does it belong? And we had a couple different offers here and there that just kind of felt like an opportunity to put the film out there, but no real marketing muscles behind it. And I mean, I could talk for days because it's just been such a process. But in the end, it was really about, I think, kind of taking it back into our own hands. We got a distributor that was willing to support us in a theatrical New York and LA, and maybe Austin. I was still fighting for that since we shot the film there. And they were calling it a specialty film, and they would be our digital distributor, put it on iTunes and all of these other platforms that you have to qualify for and go through a whole quality control process to get onto. And we passed all those things and whatever. And in the end, the marketing budget that we had to raise ourselves was going to go to New York and LA, a theatrical run for those two cities, which a lot of filmmakers would be like, oh my God, that's amazing. Like, we have an art film and we're actually going to get a run. But I started calculating. It took me, once it hit me, it took me minutes to realize that I could actually spread those marketing dollars across 10 cities instead of 2, which are overly saturated markets. Obviously, New York and LA, people go to 5 premieres a week, and we'd already played at Tribeca, played at Soho Film Festival, had a lot of private screenings, so our industry contacts knew the film, and I was kind of like, why, just to be candid, it was like, why am I gonna just take all of our money to throw a party for these people? Do you know what I mean? So we actually decided to treat it like we're a band, and we got a van, and we put decals that said Billy Bates on the van, and we drove across the country, and we did one-off events in 9 cities. Our 10th city will be New York tomorrow night. Going into markets that are really hungry for content, that really have thriving arts communities, that we're so grateful that we were there and never really get to interact with filmmakers. And quite honestly, if I were a distributor, I mean, they don't do their due diligence really, because they would probably get more out of a 7-day run in Kansas City on some of these films than they would do in LA.
And you guys were using, to do these things, you were really using social media and kind of running that yourselves?
What we did spend our money on was, social media specialists. We have an agency. We had a digital marketing agency, a division that handles grassroots. We had on-the-street media, like posters in all these different places. And then we would go in and we have an event that was one night, and make it like a really special thing, and we'd have a Q&A, and we'd have a little reception afterwards, and people talk to us, and then all of those people start tweeting about it and talking about it, and it becomes organic, you know? And I just don't think anything really replaces actual human contact, you know? So for me, I learned a ton, and then as we're on the road, the momentum that was building from the tour, we were actually able to then pick up a 7-day run in New York, which happened organically, you know? So is a combination of distribution through our distributor, but then also like do-it-yourself stuff.
I want to point out, because most of the people sitting here are students, and I just want to point out how important having some concept of the business behind the art, or the business in front of the art, is so important to becoming successful. And when I say successful, just getting a film out there and getting it seen by people. So many times, students come in here, as I've been here throughout the years, and they're so thrilled to do the art of it, and get so frustrated now when they've completed it, and they don't know how to get it seen. And here we have a person that kind of has a mind to do both. But sometimes you can't be afraid if you don't necessarily have that ability, and you have to find the people and create collaborations with others that really can help you do it if you can't do it yourself. And I think that's such a great example to show how you can, you really have to know the industry on all sides to make it happen.
Absolutely.
Thanks for sharing that. There's a whole list here. I mean, just in terms of like the marketing stuff, like the Twitter, kind of tags and everything. I mean, Ryan, you gave this all to me, and I think it's so important. It just goes down through the detail of all the things where you can find the film, and all the social media handles, and I Am Billy Bates, and Poverty Row Entertainment, that's them, all on Instagram and Facebook. I mean, this is now the culture of filmmaking, and that is how your films get made. I'm going to turn this over again, because we don't have that to these guys to ask questions, but before I do that, if you indulge me for a second. Julie, there is a guy, coincidentally, who is speaking at the New York Film Academy in Los Angeles tonight, a guy named Al, and I think you know him. And
yeah, he's my dad.
It's Julie's dad. So Al Pacino is in Los Angeles tonight. He's going to be speaking at the Film Academy. And people, you hear Julie Pacino, going into film. And people think, oh, well, that's going to be easy, right? And you try to tell people, you know what, it's never easy. But I'd love you to tell us a little bit about how being Julie Pacino and the daughter of Al Pacino has influenced you artistically in terms of the trajectory of what you want to do, and maybe how it has helped or not helped, as you get yourself into the industry.
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I guess artistically, I grew up on film sets. I visited, my dad was working all the time because it's his passion. So as a young child, I would visit him on sets, and just, even though I wasn't really necessarily processing in the moment, in looking back, those moments were were special, and those moments were why I think I have a passion for filmmaking, because I would be on these sets and kind of like, it was sort of like this magical place where something was happening that I didn't know, and kind of this separation between the character my dad was playing and then him as my dad was also an interesting kind of thing to grow up with, you know, and it gave me a good perspective. So yeah, artistically, definitely, my dad being who he is played a huge role in why I'm doing what I'm doing now. On the business side of things, you know, actually my intention was to get into the film industry without necessarily asking my dad to open any doors for me. I really wanted to do it on my own. I wanted to prove that it was something that I truly cared about, and I didn't want anything necessarily handed to me. And that was just kind of like my idea when I graduated high school, was that I wanted to, at some point, be a filmmaker. But I wasn't gonna ask my dad, you know, for help. And, you know, that's when I met Jen, you know. And Jen had been doing it at the time I met her for, you know, close to 10 years. And, you know, she was really my into the industry. She had a ton of contacts and stuff. And, you know, I mean, my dad is definitely well connected, and I definitely, at this point in my career, I've been doing it for 5 years, I definitely now am able to ask him if he can, you know, do an email intro or like put us in touch with someone that we're trying to get to when we don't necessarily want to go the traditional route through agencies or whatever it may be. But like I've always said, it's sort of about how you execute and how you walk through the doors. So my dad can open whatever doors he wants to for me or for us, but if we're not executing or if we're not producing content that people are attracted to, then it really doesn't matter.
It comes down to the work.
It comes down to the work, yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, he's the contact that we have in the industry, amongst many others.
Mm-hmm. Use all your contacts as best you can, but know to have the work behind it. Otherwise, it can't go anywhere. I want to turn it over to you guys. I also want to bring up the fact that these guys have another film that they're working on. Poverty Row has another film, the first, that's in development, which is about Mary Pickford. Going to be different from Billy Bates?
Yeah, it's definitely a different animal, different time period.
So that's something else that if we don't get to hear, if you guys don't ask about what's coming up, something I'd like to hear a little bit about. Yes, we've got a question here. We have a mic coming right over to you. If you could stand up so we can see you. It's a little hard here.
My name is Konstantin. I'm a filmmaking student from Russia. I have a question about the pre-production and production phase. How much time it took for the pre-production and production phase, and what were the main obstacles on the way?
We shot it over the course of 2.5 years, but accumulative, it would have been a 5-week shoot. Pre-production was always really fun for me because I did my own locations. So I'm really proud of the locations in the movie because I found I was seeking like very specifically authentic spaces that really resonated with the emotionality of the character's journey. But pre-production, you know, for each time we shot, I would say it was a good solid 2 weeks of pre-production. You know, maybe a little bit longer if you tack on fundraising, but in terms of making sure we had the roles filled and the locations solidified, I mean, once we were greenlit to go, it would be like 2 weeks pretty much until we shot. Obstacles on this film primarily had to do with funding. You know, there were no family or friends involved in this film on the finance side, so it was all about getting in front of people that were interested in, I would say, getting their feet wet in film, because this is obviously not the type of film you invest in if you're looking to make a lot of money. It's really about if you want to work with people that are transparent with their investors, have follow through, and kind of want to get their feet wet and just see what the process is like. That's what we were offering to our investors. So it was, you know, that was just a lot of dialogue. And we found the right people, thankfully, at the right moments. Sometimes like right down to the wire, you know, about to sign the contract on the post-production lab, and we're like, oh shit. And then the guy calls, all right, I'm gonna do it. You're like, yes.
That's the beauty of it. you
Like
know?
a day
That's
before
like-
we
yeah.
have to go in. So, you know, stuff like that.
Somebody else? Anybody? Come on, don't be shy. There we go, right there.
Hi, I'm in the screenwriting program here, and I was wondering about how many drafts of the script you went through, how many major overhauls I guess you got to do.
I couldn't really give you a precise number, but I would say, oh man, just, you know, so many. I feel like it was being worked on while we were shooting, you know? I feel like for us, for me, the script was just constantly a work in progress because, again, I was always trying to find that authentic voice, you know? I really wanted to make sure that I was projecting myself into the character so that I knew that I was being real in his moment-to-moment reality. And sometimes I'd have to call bullshit on something that's being said because of the way that I wrote it. So that would need a change, whether it was in the moment or in the edit or wherever. I really can't give you a number, but it was all about just being open and being flexible and just continuing to fine tune, you know.
Which is kind of how it goes with screenplays. You know, they're constantly a work in progress, even when you're on set. I mean, they're really just kind of a roadmap. Once you get on set, you know, as a director, you might want to change things when you're in the moment actually there. So it's kind of hard to put an exact number of drafts to when you say, okay, this is finished, because I think it's kind of always growing and evolving.
Jen, I'm just interested when I talk to writers just to find a little bit about their process, you know, from an inception of an idea to actually getting that idea down on paper. How do you work it? Do you, I remember reading about Steven Soderbergh and hearing him talk, and he had kept a diary, and he would kind of write random scenes, and then he'd try to pull out from those scenes a through line and create it. I'm just interested what your process may be.
I would write like the first draft of the script in like less than an hour.
Wow.
And because I work I'm just weird like that. Like once my kind of floodgates open and I feel like intuitively I am in the zone, I just go until the end, you know? But then it starts that process of rereading and calling bullshit. And then for me, a lot happens in my dream state, or not even like in my dream state, but like right when I wake up from dreaming, and I'll need to like write in a journal quickly before I forget, and then like translate it into the script. And I like to find a lot of moments on set too, you know? So I like working with the actors as well. I just directed a play, and I feel like even on a film set, I like that rehearsal process because I would hear things and then change them because it just didn't sound authentic, you know? So I don't know, it's like painting, right? It's sort of a canvas, and you kind of throw these lines and these scenes and these things. I've never learned screenwriting. I don't know by page 30 what's supposed to happen. You know, I've heard about the formulas that you kind of learn, and I've written my whole life, you know, and it's always been a very intuitive thing. So I use a voice recorder a lot.
That's good.
That's a tool I use, like walking through the city and stuff, or if I'm not in the mood to write, I will record my voice saying it, and that is really cool.
I do that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever process works for you is the process you have to adopt. That's
Totally
kind of
make
what
it your own.
Are you going to be directing? Are you writing the first together?
No, Jen's writing it with another writer.
And you're going to direct it?
I'm directing it, yeah.
Do you feel that there is always a certain stylistic or conceptual idea that pulls you back, regardless of what the storyline may be? That there's something that always is a through line. Now you guys are doing music videos together, and I'm just wondering if you feel that there's, in work that you do, that there seems to be a consistent element that always that always reappears somehow and kind of brings you through?
I do. I'm learning that. I think that for me, it really has to do with like the portals of the psyche. So I realize, like, even on our music videos, you know, it's really it's a very subjective perspective. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's about being inside this person's head, and that's why we play with time in Billy Bates. You know, you get stuck on these like maniacal thought patterns, and you repeat things in your head, or you have deja vu moments and things you kind of feel like you've experienced before. And I feel like that is a through line in my work. Like that kind of psychology, the reality we have in our head, is very interesting to me. You know, like a Being John Malkovich or Eternal Sunshine, or things where everything's kind of skewed because that's life, you know? Yeah.
Which is like why it's exciting to be in production on this movie about Mary Pickford, who was one of the first, you know, female silent movie stars of all time. It's a period piece, and you know, she was a huge pioneer in the industry. Founded United Artists with Charlie Chaplin and Fairbanks, and did all these amazing things. So it's exciting for me as a producer to be working again with Jen as a director on this project, just because I know she's going to bring that edginess to the project, and it's not just going to be this straightforward, you know, biopic that's kind of goes from A to Z. So yeah, I would agree with you that that's definitely the through line in all of your work, the portals of the mind.
I wish I got the opportunity to see, I wish we all had the opportunity to see some of the music videos that you've done, because that's what I felt from your film, like from watching this film. I felt like this is an artist that has a very specific kind of vision in the way that she wants to tell stories. You know, that there's something that she's going to go back to, and I felt that from the film, and I feel like if we saw the other work, we would see that.
You can see them all
On our website, yeah.
It's all
So
been
I'm going to go
released.
on there and look at that. I think it's an important thing for people studying film to recognize, because that's what makes you a unique artist. And while everything can be individual, seeing that through line really tells you that the person has a focus and something that they want to accomplish in each project.
That's cool, yeah, finding your voice, I guess.
Finding your voice, that's really great. You were about to say something, I interrupted you, probably.
No, it's okay.
Somebody else? Yes. Gentleman over there. Here's a microphone, we want you to repeat it.
Hi.
Hi.
Like, what was the process like when finding like your Billy Bates? What made you choose him, the actor?
I chose him because I wrote it for him. I actually had met him in an acting class at the neighborhood playhouse studying Meisner. And the friendship that we had developed and the way I saw him growing as an actor made me want to work with him, because I knew that we had the trust factor, and I felt like I could push him to go to these places and he would be willing to go there. Which I think for a first time directing, that was important to me, to walk onto set with an actor that I knew already respected me as a director, even though I had yet to create work as a director that was already there. So I knew he had the range, and I knew he was the person that I wanted to work with. And the girl, Savannah, I actually met as an extra in this experimental shoot that I was doing in Austin, and ended up being so inspired by some improv that they did that I wrote Billy Bates with her as the lead, and got our investors to support me in going to shoot again with a new girl. So I was excited to find her. Yeah, and it all happened kind of like that. I didn't hold any auditions. I held auditions for the little boy, actually. That was the only time I held auditions.
I think it's interesting also that you mentioned you were in an acting class. Julie, you were in a directing class at the Film Academy. You're producing now. You're directing. How important is it to study, or at least to experience, all sides of the industry, in a sense, in terms of getting the creative work done or the business work done, knowing the creative to do the business and vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's essential. I didn't know that until I started producing, but you know, as the director, of a film, I think that it's important to know about everything that's happening because you're directing the film. I mean, you're the one at the top of the triangle that everyone's looking to. So it's really important to know the business side and know what the people that are working with you are putting into it and how hard it is. Just as important as it would be to know what the actors are going through, because you know, you want to be able to feel things from all these different perspectives as the director. So, you know, that's something that I learned early on. I directed this short that Jen and I did, and I learned a lot directing that. But now as I've been producing, I'm just so grateful for the experience because I can kind of see that when I do eventually direct again, it's really going to help me understand how to realize my vision and how to get there, because it's hard to get there, I think.
Yeah, it is hard. If it was easy, we'd all do it all the time.
Yeah, I do think it's important to speak the language of all the different departments, and that's kind of how you create a good on-set sort of ambiance too, is as a director, if you can relate to walking in all these different departments and know what the PA is doing and craft service is doing and the grips are doing, and you kind of realize that it's all equally important and everyone should be treated as if they're as important as the actor or anybody else. Like, no one's gonna be happy if they're not eating good food on set. That's like 101. So, you know, that's important to just be humble, I think, and realize it's a collaboration from everyone. Yeah.
Hello. In terms of the acting again, because you said you shot it over 2.5 years, I'm just thinking, did you do the acting all in one stint, or was that also spread over the 2.5 years? Because I can imagine with the characters also that they were playing, it was quite intense. So maybe, I mean, I wonder how it was like for them to have to go in and out of it, rather than...
The only person that was there every day on every shoot was Jimmy, who plays Billy. Most of the other actors actually never had to come back. So they were in one stint. But for Jimmy, again, it was so much about our friendship and our relationship that we were just constantly talking about the growth of the project.
Right. So
In between filming, he knew what was happening with me in the edit and what I was rewriting, and if he gained weight or lost weight or his hair got long, I would use it. And it would just like always happen to work that he looked the way he did when he was going through this psychosis. I just, again, like a documentary, I really just went with what I was handed and worked. I was thinking of it more on like a study of humanity or something, and that was kind of fun to sort of surrender and not tell him, like, cut your hair or do this or do that, just kind of watch him grow as I was growing and let the story evolve that way, you know.
Did you worry at all about the emotional continuity of the storyline, shooting it over such a long period?
No, I mean, I guess in the edit, there were times where I was overwhelmed and confused, but I didn't worry. Should I have?
No, that's
okay,
great.
I
mean, if you can pull it together, and I think the story itself lends itself to a little bit of surprising change. I would think, just in that. I think there are certain things that are very easier to do over a longer period, like a film like this, and especially when you called it experimental. And so
Other people call it that, yeah.
Do you call it that?
There was one piece of the shoot that I called experimental, and that was like when we did the documentary stuff, the interview stuff, and him walking on the streets. This was all during South by Southwest, and the idea was completely different than Billy Bates, and I ended up using footage from that. So that was an experiment, because I did this. I won't even talk about that. It'll take too long. But yeah,
It's a fearlessness. I mean, I think that's kind of what I'm getting at. That you have to have, in making films, even when you're doing it in a very set period of time, and it's over 3 months, let's say, sometimes there's always concern of like, am I matching it emotionally? Is everything working out properly? Are people going to get the fluidity of the storyline? And I think to do it that way, it takes a fearlessness. And I think that's what this movie shows is a sense of that.
it does, and it was abandoning the audience perspective. Honestly, when I got into polishing the edit, I was thinking more from the audience perspective. But for the majority of the making of the film, that would have been a distraction for me. You know, I had to really check in just with myself. You know, it was like there was a point when the girl wasn't going to leave Billy. That wasn't going to happen in the story. But when I reflected on something that had happened in my own relationship that I had just gotten out of, I realized that I couldn't have started my creative journey while I was in that relationship. Like, I got the first funding for my first directing as soon as that relationship ended. So I thought it was also important for Billy that she helped him get to that point, and they were willing to let go of each other, that she had to walk away in order for him to really create and like see himself to the next phase of his life and realize what he had learned from being with her. So it was things like that where I just kind of checked in with myself and thought, is this really his next move? And I just had to reflect, you know, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that kind of fearlessness in making an artistic piece is very inspiring.
Cool.
I really appreciate that. I think we have time for one last question. Yeah.
Hi, I'd like to know whether you were both on the same page throughout the process of the film, or if you weren't, did it make for some good creativity that came out in the end result?
Me and Julie? Well, because she was on board through the post process. I think that we were pretty consistently on the same page.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of these story came together in the post process for Jen. So it wasn't necessarily about being on the same page. I was acting as a creative producer, as a soundboard for her to say, you know, to sort of kind of throw ideas at and say, what if we did this? Or, but yeah, I mean, we were on the same page.
Yeah, or she would ask me a question. If she didn't understand what I was doing, she would ask me about it, and I would explain it and then get her on board. There was another producer that came on board that created more challenges for us. He put in money and had say in the edit. I had final say creatively, but he definitely, inserted himself into that process. So that was more of a thing where, you have to be diplomatic and you try all the notes that he gave, and then kind of a couple of them, I was like, oh shit, I didn't realize what you're talking about. That was a good idea. And then because I did that, he realized I don't have ego in the game. So then he was like, all right, cool, we'll get rid of my other notes. Yeah, so it's just that process is interesting. There's one more thing I want to say about what you asked about the knowing all facets of production in order to be a director, and that is really empowering. There's a guy I know, Todd, who produced The Kids Are All Right, produced Manglehorn with your dad, is financing films, producing, and he was successful in another industry, and he is PAing on his sets as a producer and investor because he doesn't know production, he doesn't claim to know production. So he finances the movie, gets a producer credit, and he's the PA. And I think that's really, really cool. So,
Thank you guys so much for being here. Billy Bates is going to be at the Quad Cinemas starting tomorrow for 10 days.
7.
7
7.
days. We can get 3 more, can't we? So if you guys want to be a paying customer, you should go to the Quad Cinema and tell your friends about it.
Please.
Thank you
Yeah.
again so much for coming, and we hope you'll come back with the next film.
For
sure.
sure, yeah. Definitely tweet at us.
Yeah, tweet at us and social media with us. It's #IamBillyBates. And the film's also available digitally if you don't feel like going to the movie theater and you want to pause it and watch different
do
things.
both.
Or do both, yeah, do everything.
Thank you.